Hello, I'll be doing my presentation on my project poster. So for my project poster, I've decided to do a project on recasts and explicit correction in language-related episodes, specifically in L2 dyadic picture description tasks. So my project mostly examined how L2 learners of different proficiency levels responded to recasts, which I coded in blue, and explicit corrections, which I've coded in red, during different picture description tasks. It explored whether learners noticed or modified their output, and how proficiency influenced their feedback type, and which feedback type was most effective. As you can see in the poster, I've got an introduction, objectives, methodology, key findings, discussion, teaching implications, and limitations. In the introduction, I've just basically outlined that corrective feedback is very important in language learning, and the effectiveness, however, varies. So I've also looked at how recasts offer implicit reformulations that support fluency, and I've decided to base my project, as seen in the introduction, on Long's interaction hypothesis and Swain's output hypothesis. And this study basically explored how proficiency influences different learners and their responsiveness to these feedback types. For the objectives, I had lots of research questions, but my main research questions was basically to examine how recast and explicit correction affect uptake, and to compare the responses between lower IELTS proficiency and higher IELTS proficiency. My methodology I have in the corner there, which is 5 steps from participants, the setting, tasks, feedback, and analysis. So I had 4 Korean L2 English learners aged 26 to 30, all trying to do IELTS or PTE. Pair 1's IELTS is 4 to 5, and Pair 2's IELTS is 6 to 7. It was in a university setting, and I gave them 2 picture description tasks, and I basically gave recasts and explicit correction as feedback, and then from that data analyzed which is best and which works, and how language-related episodes reflect the learner's attentions to form. In my graphs and my key findings there, you can see that I've got explicit correction, language-related episodes, and recast, and I've displayed them in each pair. Pair 2 is the orange and Pair 1 is the blue, and I basically just looked up all the unsuccessful uptakes and successful ones in both explicit correction and recasts, and I've also looked at the language-related episodes, so lexical and grammatical, and in the findings I found that explicit correction was more effective for advanced learners as it promotes self-repair, but recasts were highly successful for low-level learners. So Pair 1 had mostly grammatical LREs, language-related episodes, and Pair 2 had a mix of lexical and grammatical focuses. And the proficiency definitely influenced how learners noticed and processed feedback. In my discussion, I mainly talked about all of the theoretical frameworks that guided my project, my research project. So a lot of Long, Swain, and how recasts supported input processing. The explicit correction promoted pushed output and metalinguistic reflection, as stated by Swain. And learners' response reflected development stage and interlingual restructuring. In my teaching implications, I found that the match feedback to learner level recast were equal to lower proficiency but maintained fluency, and explicit correction had high proficiency, which promoted accuracy. In my limitations on the bottom right of my poster, it was a small sample size and it was only restricted to Korean learners, and I only assessed immediate uptake with no long-term tracking. Also, as a researcher, as a teacher, that may introduce bias in learning. Yeah, so overall in my poster, as you can see, I've tried to include everything in my project, and I've tried to include as much detail as possible. My project was quite tough and it had a lot of tough moments, but overall I'm very proud of my project. Thank you kindly.